Apple's tax bill may have changed the tone for the dollar. The Bloomberg Dollar Index rebounded after hitting a 3-year low yesterday. Is tax repatriation the theme that buoys the dollar bounce back? And what does it mean for treasuries? Joining us now from Singapore is Mark Cudmore, Bloomberg MLIV strategist. Mark, pulling back $200 billion in cash necessitates transferring your currency into dollars. Is that one of the reasons for the rebound?
Certainly it seemed to change the sentiment, and that's the narrative that's going around. But I think it's slightly confusing. Apple has a lot of assets still on shore. It doesn't hold just treasuries. It also holds a lot of corporate securities. It was a bit strange that both treasury yields ticked up and the dollar kind of rallied so much. I don't think there's a necessity for the dollar to necessarily react on this news, apart from the sentiment shift. Apple might be repatriating some flows back to the US, but over a long period of time. And there's also a kind of general belief that a lot of these assets are already in US dollar. So it may not result in a conversion into the actual US dollar. However, it has changed the sentiment. It has helped kind of people have a little bit more sympathy for the idea that the dollar might bounce. That said, I've had a massive pushback in the last 24 hours since saying that I thought the dollar might have bottomed out yesterday.
Just to pick up on a kind of element of the story, Mark, the treasury market, though, a lot of this, and I'm not just talking about Apple here, I'm talking about Microsoft, I'm talking about a whole bunch of companies, they're holding these offshore assets, as you say, mainly in dollars, but mainly in treasuries as well. And it's just another element that could get the treasury market moving on the downside. It's just another tailwind that could be pushing things lower.
Certainly, and that's what people were trading off yesterday. But I think that won't be the case over longer term. It might help kind of yields spike up in the short term. But these companies, while they hold a lot of treasuries, they also hold a lot of other assets. And I think Apple's a great case in point, where I'm pretty sure its corporate debt holdings completely dwarf its treasury holdings. So to see the reaction in treasuries and yet not the reaction in corporates doesn't seem to quite follow through. Either this should be negative for both corporate holdings and treasury holdings, or it shouldn't be negative for treasury holdings. So I think this is a story that's been slightly mistaken at the moment in the short-term reaction. The fact is that there is just a little bit of upward momentum in US Treasury yields at the moment, and I think people are kind of picking the story to fit the price action.
Well, I mean, if you're going to sell treasuries, that must mean you have some other plans for the cash, right? Otherwise, you might as well just hold treasuries when you bring it back to the U.S. Apple, for example, says it's going to invest $30 billion over the next 5 years. Do you think this new tax cut tax reform bill is going to sincerely boost capital expenditures?
Look, there's some very positive signs in that regard, and I think it would be foolish to completely dismiss them. I think it can be an argument about how much it will boost growth and how much it will boost capex, but I do think it's a genuine boost, and I think people who kind of dismiss it as like purely an equity story are missing the picture slightly. Yes, it's mainly an equity story. It's mainly about boosting corporate earnings, but as we discussed, if you boost corporate earnings, you get a small uptick in wages and you should get more capex, and all these things feed through another positive cycle. So I think there is a slight positive capex cycle there at the moment in the US. And this is, again, helps the whole idea that the US looks like it'll grow faster than most other G10 countries this year, even though it didn't last year. And yet the narrative out there seems to be the exact opposite.
Mark, do you think Jens Weidmann's going to try and talk the euro down a little bit later? He speaks in 20 minutes.
Well, he's a notorious hawk, and I think most kind of euro bulls, and it seems like the whole market is completely bullish the euro still. I mean, it's unbelievable kind of the feedback I got on the call yesterday that the dollar was probably going to bounce from yesterday. And the main argument was, this is ridiculous. Euro itself is going higher. Not only do people not believe in dollar bouncing, but they just didn't believe the euro can pull back. And that kind of feedback was both internal and external. People very much believe in the euro story. And one of the elements in the short term is people expect Jens Weidmann to talk hawkishly. He is an notorious hawk. If the euro can't rally much after he speaks, then I think for me, it's looking more negative for the euro going into the ECB next week, because I do think Draghi will err on the dovish side, especially given the kind of comments we've seen in the last few days.